So the Savo, I've got a couple of jobs to do on my Jazz Bass Copy project guitar. I showed the neck in a video a couple of weeks ago where I leveled the board and refretted it. Since then I've also refitted the machine heads. They were already in this neck to start with, so that was pretty easy. In the string tree, I've added my little Rob Mods logo there with sort of a Polynesian tattoo inspired process that I did with Project Barocca. I've also given it 4 or 5 coats of satin lacquer. You can still kind of see and slightly feel the grain, but that's how I like it. The other thing I've done is I've just filled up the old holes. As I mentioned, this neck has been used on 2 or 3 other projects. Didn't bother filling the 2 holes in the middle here because they're a good distance from where the new screw holes to attach the neck will be. These are for my holding stick when I spray paint. I figured I may as well leave them there just in case I have to do a finish repair or refinish down the track. Pretty sure I've shown this body in another video. It's from, well, it's not a Fender body, it's from another Jazz Bass Copy, sort of an off-brand thing. I've had the body kicking around for ages actually. It was gloss black, and originally I was just going to do some basic touch-up repairs in the worst areas and then buff it out and move on. But then I decided it really needed a full respray, and when I started scuffing it back I realised just how uneven the timbers were and also how thin the original coating was, and because I got a few sand throughs, so I ended up sanding it quite heavily, redoing all of the edges and chamfers and blocking it back so it's dead flat and ready to spray. And this is how it looked. I actually just thought it looked really cool the way it was and that it was never really going to look like this again, so I gave it a coat of shellac to seal the bare timber parts, and then it's had 2 or 3 coats of just matte clear lacquer. Today I'm going to fit the neck, and I'm also going to do something about the pick guard, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've done so far. There's quite a bit of groundwork to do before you fit a neck when you're building, parts casters and things, when you're putting together parts that were never really meant to go together. Luckily, with this project, the neck heel and pocket are actually a pretty decent fit. There's not a lot of looseness in there. So what I started with was just sort of pulling this in tight to this line here, and then I ran my rulers either side of it with masking tape underneath and created and projected these lines forward. I also found a center line by using the existing routes, the pickup routes and also the neck pocket route, and created a center line. And then I could place my bridge. Now, for some reason, the original bridge was a long way forward from where this new bridge is, and I'm not entirely sure why that would be. Either the neck on this the original neck for this body might have had a shorter scale, or perhaps it had an extra fret or 2 and the whole neck and everything was further down this way. I'm not really sure, but the way to find the spot for the bridge is firstly to measure the scale, and you do that by working out the exact dimension from the front end of the nut to the center of the 12th fret, and in this case it is a 34-inch scale instrument. It's really important to measure that though, and that's because a lot of manufacturers, especially in Asia, use metric, and even if something seems like a 34-inch scale, which is 863.5 millimeters or something around about there, I've actually come across quite a few necks that are actually 860 millimeter scale. Or other scales as well. So once you know exactly the scale length, then you can mark a 0 point on perpendicular to your center line. Then it's a matter of sort of judging where the bridge is going to go, and you can see I've actually pushed these saddles sort of as far forward as they can sort of comfortably be set. And then the witness point is sort of the front edge of all of these saddles, and then I know exactly how further forward the front edge of the actual tailpiece or the actual main body of the bridge is from those witness points, and I can allow for that and draw a line for the front end of this. To be honest, this witness point doesn't really have to be exactly on that 0 point. If anything, depending on the way the bridge is designed, you can actually set that back a good 1 or 2 millimeters, because you're always going to be drawing these backwards to create intonation compensation with the bridge. So this is the original pickguard, and I think this is the original electronics cover for this body as well. And even though I have decided to use both these original items, I still went ahead and filled in all of the original holes before I finished the body for those 2 items, because I knew that I'd still be kind of tweaking their position so that they lined up perfectly with the pickup routes, and that the pickups themselves would be in line with all the strings and everything. Again, with parts casters, even if you're using the original parts, you still end up often tweaking their positions just so that they are aligned right and they also look right. I do really want a black pickguard for this project, and I actually have, in my junk box I found a Fender Jazz pickguard, and I assume this is, well, if it's not a genuine Fender item, it's designed to fit genuine Fender items, and I thought, great, I'll just use that. But of course this doesn't fit at all. This is because this body, like I say, is an off-brand Jazz Bass copy. I could actually move this slightly and drop this to the body, but even then these curves are a long way from working, and this one's just too short, so it's not like I can remove material and kind of finesse it into shape. This would just not work at all. So I'm actually going to go with the original pickguard, and that's because I just happen to have some black vinyl wrap, so I'm actually going to put some black vinyl wrap on this. The other option, of course, would be to buy a blank, and you can just buy black, white, black 3-ply plastics online. It's not that expensive, and then remake the pickguard altogether. And I may still do that, but I do have some black vinyl wrap there, so it's easy enough to coat the front face of the pickguard. I've actually done a little video on that a year or 2 ago. It's quite a cool technique. It's something I'm going to talk about a bit further in this video today, because I've actually got some new techniques I've developed for doing that. You can see here I've actually done a little modification to the pickguard. Again, I think I've glued in a little bit of plastic, or is that timber? And then just added a little bit of material here and sanded it back so it's a good fit. Again, the idea is really to get a good fit, I think, on the top side of your pickguard, because let's face it, that's where you're looking. When you're playing, you're constantly looking down at the fretboard, and if that's there's a really ugly gap there, it just cheapens the whole instrument and doesn't really look that good. So with that lined up and the body and the bridge all in place, then I can go ahead and refit the electronics cavity to match this. And that, even though again these are original parts, I still actually had to work on the fitment of the electronics cover to the pickguard, and it's just a matter of filing and scraping a little bit of plastic again so this fits and so that it follows the line of the body well and looks right. So originally this neck plate was a long way off center, and it's really not ideal, and that's because these wood screws will be very close to the edge of the neck heel on this side. So I've actually moved the neck plate over here, and the way I found this position is by fitting the neck, and you can see I just marked that back line with the edge of some masking tape, and then I've just dragged this up like that. Then I can use a combination square to bring this edge up and over. Then I can just kind of eyeball the back of the heel and work out where this plate is best located. I want it centered in the neck, and I want it back towards the rear of the neck pocket, because that will get a better hold on the neck. Then it's just a matter of measuring that, and it's about 3 millimeters from the edge at the back here. So then I was able to find the right location for the neck plate by just making sure I was 3 millimeters from that line, and also so that this rear edge was parallel with the body. Then I could mark these up, center punch them and drill them. I think I drilled them out to 11/64, which is just a hair under 4.5 millimeters. And that's because that's exactly what these are across the threads. It's really important to get these holes the right dimension. You want the threads to be, well, you want it to be a snug fit, but also so that once the screw gets to the bottom of the hole, it actually spins in the body and continues to draw the neck heel up and into the neck pocket, because you want them to actually keep the joint nice and tight. In Project Barocca, I think one of the original problems was that these were not wide enough, and so the screws were just jamming in the bottom before they had a chance to tighten that joint up. And it's really important that the neck is nice and tight in the neck pocket. Bear in mind that with most bolt-on guitars, Fender style guitars, the thickness of the timber below the neck pocket is, getting up near double the amount of screw that's actually going to wind up and be left in the neck heel itself. So if this hole in the body is too small, you will never get the screw to slip. It's always going to stop and jam. And again, you'll never get that neck heel fitment nice and firm. To the point where I've seen neck screws all chewed out from screwdrivers, or even heads just broken right off from people desperately trying to tighten up the joint, especially after they've, say, fitted a shim and not realised that in the factory it was probably clamped together nice and firm, and then they just drive the screw in. So even though this neck heel is actually quite a nice fit in the pocket, and I've done all of that groundwork to make sure it's well aligned, I'm still going to clamp it in place so that when I transfer those holes into the neck heel, I know that they're going to be in exactly the right spot. I've got the finish protected with a little piece of scrap on the back, and I've also got the fretwork protected with this piece of felt. I'm just going to clamp that in. It doesn't have to be super tight, just enough to hold it there. And that way I can get this perfectly lined up, or at least make sure it's still perfectly lined up. Alright, so I've got the pickup covers in the routs, and I'm just using a couple of straight edges to project the sides of the neck down forward to the bridge, and everything looks pretty much perfect with the outer holes of the pickup covers where the magnets will be, and also down to the front corners of the bridge. So if it wasn't quite aligned, I could just slacken this clamp off by a quarter turn, give the neck a bit of a wiggle, and then tighten it up and recheck it all. But it pretty much looks perfect, so I can go ahead and get those holes into the neck heel. Probably goes without saying, but I've got the clamp in this orientation so that the large adjustment screw is out of the way on the other side from my drill. But it means, of course, that I've got to drag this over to the edge of the bench so that the clamp clears the edge of the bench. And to balance it all, I've got my bag of lead shot. I use this as a dead weight when I'm fretting as well. It's a really handy thing, and it's good for this sort of application as well. And here is the top tip. I've got my 11/64 chucked up in my hand drill, and the way to transfer the centers of these oversized holes down to the neck heel is actually to set my drill going backwards or anti-clockwise first. So make sure it's going backwards, and I'll just transfer those holes. So I've got a 7/64 drill, which happens to be just about the same size, or a hair smaller actually, than the central part of the screw, if you imagine it without its threads. And I've also marked the depth with some masking tape. The last thing you want to do is drill right through into the fretboard. If you've got a big enough drill press, you can do this on there. I don't. I've only got a little baby drill press in this workshop these days. Bear in mind though that on a drill press table, of course, the neck will be resting on kind of radiused frets, so you're going to have to stabilize it and just make sure this is perfectly parallel with the table and perfectly perpendicular to your drill. Instead, I'm actually just going to do it on the bench. I've got some non-slip, and I'm just going to put my bag of weight on top to hold it in place, and to make sure I'm nice and true, I'm going to use my old trick of using this sliding part of my old combination square to sight my drill. Oh, that's perfect. Nice. Okay, I'm going to move on to the pickguard. So a while back I made a video where I put vinyl wrap onto the pickguard for Project Barocca. It's a fun, quite heavily edited video, so check it out. I've already done the first couple of steps. I've cleaned the front face of this with denatured alcohol, and I've put on the vinyl wrap itself. It's pretty easy to do. I've left it oversized, and that's for a reason. In the video, I just used a scalpel blade and cut round the actual screw holes, which are kind of hard to see because they're covered in vinyl wrap, of course. And that works quite well. It's a bit fiddly, but it works just fine. The problem with this pickguard is that the countersinks have actually been drilled quite deeply, and it means the tops of them are quite a bit bigger in diameter than the heads on my screws. So what that means is that if I cut this vinyl wrap flush to those, then I'll be left with a little white circle around the top of each screw, and I think it's going to not look so good. So I've been messing around with some ideas so that I can hopefully leave the vinyl wrap in place and just put the screw in over the top. There's kind of a technical issue going on here too, and that is that countersinks actually vary. So I think when you go to a hardware store and you buy a little countersinking rose like this, normally what you get, well, it's like an imperial standard, I think, and it means the two faces of the countersink are going to be 82 degrees. And that's perfectly fine in timber, because if the screw's countersink is not 80 degrees, and most of them are 90 degrees these days, certainly metric fasters are 90 degrees, it doesn't really matter because the timber's going to compress and it's going to work out fine. But in this case, what happens is that the screw engages with the plastic in a circle around the top of the screw head. And I think the problem is going to be that it will sort of cut and compress and maybe even twist off the vinyl wrap. So with this pickguard, I have been messing around with some offcuts, and I've come up with an idea which sort of works, and it's a way of keeping this vinyl wrap in place so that I can actually put the screw in over the top, and it will actually hide what would otherwise be that white circle. So with some scrap aluminium rod, I think this is either 6mm or 1/4 inch, I've actually chucked this up into my drill press and filed a countersink, and that's pretty close to 90 degrees. And what I want to use this for is to press the heated vinyl wrap down into those holes. So I'm just going to use my heat gun and very quickly warm it up. And then with this, I can actually press that down into the hole and hold it for a bit until it cools. And that's now, you can see that's, if I can get the light there, you can see that's now been pressed into the hole. And it's also why I've left this excess. I've noticed when the hole is quite close to the edge of the pickguard, it actually pulls it over slightly. So I've got an excess there now, and that's been pressed down into the hole, and it's kind of stuck to the sides of the countersink. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the rest of these holes. So most of the curves that are beveled, I'll actually do that by scraping it with a fresh Stanley blade. For all of the hard edges, I'll do those with a sharp scalpel blade, but it does generally still need a little bit of tidying up, so I'm going to take this over to my magnifier and just tidy up some of these furry edges a bit. Yeah, so those edges look quite nice and clean, and because I've spent some time fitting it in the past, it fits perfectly. There are some scratches on the vinyl wrap. That's partly because it's a really old roll I've had kicking around. It's also because it's just frankly cheap vinyl wrap from eBay with gloss black. If you really want a perfect job, you're going to have to spend the money on the top end vinyl wrap, or if you know someone who works as a vinyl wrap, for a vinyl wrap business, they might be able to give you some offcuts of the sort of signage grade and automotive grade, fancy 3M stuff. To be honest, if you really want a perfect job, just make a new pickguard. But for a quick and dirty change like this, I think it works fine, and it'll suit this instrument just fine. I might even change it up again. So as a final precaution against the screws grabbing the vinyl wrap and sort of tearing it up or making a mess of it, I'm going to do a couple of things. Firstly, I'm going to put the screws in by hand using the right size screwdriver, and before that I'm going to actually use a little bit of dry lube on a cotton bud and just go around and just put a bit of that into all of these little countersinks. So the neck's a nice fit, and the pickguard looks the business, and the Project Jazz bass is, well, it's starting to finally look like an actual bass. In the next video, I guess I'll be wiring it up. I've got some pickups ready to go, and I'll set it up as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, let me know in the comments if you've had a go at using vinyl wrap on a pickguard, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.